Have you ever solved a Rubik's Cube?
I have never legitimately solved a Rubik's Cube.
So I'm on a mission to solve a Rubik's Cube.
Good for you.
So I started watching a video, and they take you through, and it's like patterns. So they take you through, and one side you want to get, it'll look like a daisy. So it's like the 4 white and the yellow in the middle.
Interesting.
And I have the daisy. And someone picked up my Rubik's Cube.
You don't have the daisy anymore.
The daisy's gone.
Oh, Laura.
And it's okay. I can get it again, right? If I got it once.
Right.
But it was literally, it was not, there was no progress in that, but it was something. Sure. And I haven't checked it in a while, and I always have it sitting here. And I'm like, and the only people it could have been, and I feel bad because I'm going to call them out because they're wonderful guys. The sports guys, our sports editor and 2 of our sports writers are on the sports podcast.
Sure, yeah.
And so they're the only ones that come in here on a regular basis. And I'm like, it was one of them.
It's got to be one of them.
One of them.
Man.
I'm going to have to talk to them. I'm going to be like, who played with my Rubik's Cube? But to be fair, I did put it here.
That's
where
true.
it's somewhere.
Within reach. So.
Yeah, maybe I should.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's fine. It's not the end of the world.
It's not.
Right?
You'll do it again.
We're going to, have conversations about things that are more important to focus on. So,
I hope so.
Yeah, I think so too. Hello, and welcome to this season of Alter Eagle. I am your host, Laura Crago. Let's keep the conversation going. Now a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. For a long time, I suffered with depression and anxiety. I had tried therapy before, but struggled finding a therapist I connected with until I found BetterHelp. That's why I am so excited to share BetterHelp's mission to make therapy more affordable and more accessible. Because finding a therapist can be hard, especially when you're limited to the options in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online. Remote therapy sessions, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. Click the link in description and receive 10% off your first month of BetterHelp. And by clicking that link, you support this channel. Plus, you can easily switch to a new therapist at no additional cost without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. I was struggling for a long time, and BetterHelp was where I found my therapist, Whitney, who I still see weekly for almost 2 years now. So, if you're struggling, like I was, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in description or go to betterhelp.com/alter eagle. That's betterhelp.com/alter eagle. There's no better time than now to start your mental health journey. Thank you again, BetterHelp, for supporting this channel. I just want to thank you. I am sitting down with Eric Campbell today. We met through his wife, Maria. I actually met them at a friend's house for a birthday party. It was for a kid's birthday party. And then shortly after that, your wife had, commented on a few things. And she's like, I listened to the podcast. I haven't listened in a while. And immediately when I hear that there's a listener, I'm like, okay, what do you think? Like, what feedback do you have for me? Like, how can I improve? Or would you want to come on? I'm going to be doing a book club. So we just started chatting and about a few things. And she said, well, let me talk to my husband. He actually might be the person that you need to talk to. And then when she told me what you do and that you went to school for theology, which that word to me just sounds impressive. It just sounds like immediately I'm like, well, he's wicked smart. So, I get to pull out Boston.
Maybe so.
Boston every once in a while because I did live there. So I get to pull out the Boston accent or wording. But, sitting here with Eric Campbell, he's the director of operations for Decided Excellence, which is a Catholic media company. So tell us a little bit about your company and what you do.
Absolutely, Laura. It's so good to be here with you today. There have been so many great people who have sat in these seats with you. So I'm excited to be counted amongst that illustrious group of people. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hopeful that I can give some interesting thoughts today for us and for the listeners. But yes, I work for Decided Excellence Catholic Media, and what we do print media for parishes and Christian communities across the United States who want to reach their flock, their people. And they want a nice high-quality magazine publication that can really highlight the good things that they're doing and to help evangelize the people in their parish. So that's what we do primarily, and it's an exciting business to be a part of.
I bet it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a part of a print company, right? I don't get to be a part of the putting all the publications together and all of that, but I do feel like I'm a part of that. As you can see, we have newspaper on the walls in here.
Absolutely.
So mostly sports, because that's, when we record for the sports guys. But yeah, I think that's so interesting that you do that. And I want to hear a little bit more. And I'm certain that our listeners want to hear more about just your evolution. I think for me, what's so fascinating is how you got into theology. Like, what was it that you went to Duquesne University, and then you were overseas from 2000, you graduated in 2010 and you were overseas till 2012. So, and you did tell me that while you were in school that you had to study Spanish.
Yes, we did.
And then you found out you were going to Italy and you had to learn Italian. So all of this is so fascinating to me. So tell us a little bit about, obviously grew up Catholic, grew up in Butler, but I'm going to let you just tell us your story.
Yeah, happy to. It's at least I think it's pretty interesting. I grew up here in Butler, spent my entire life here. My family's here. I have two older sisters. We all graduated from Butler Senior High School. I graduated in 2006. And it was one of those things where I was thinking so much about, what do I want to do with my life? What am I called to do? And it was really interesting sitting here. I'm just remembering that I had a meeting with my guidance counselor at the intermediate, who was the mother of one of my friends. And she said, you know what? You're going to make a great journalist. And
oh, wow.
And I thought, that sounds crazy. And I left there thinking, I have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah. I'm not going to be involved with that at all. And here I am now, so many years later, involved with print media. So it is kind of a funny world how that works.
It is.
I graduated in 2006, and I was thinking, what am I going to do with my life? And I knew that I was called to help others. I really had a desire in my heart to help those who are the least fortunate, the people that we need to reach out to and assist. And a part of that, the answer to the call for me, was to go into what's called the seminary. And that's where young guys go to discern, which means to think about and to pray about what they might be called to, and that might be the priesthood. So I entered into a Catholic seminary in 2006 down in Pittsburgh, St. Paul Seminary, and a part of that was going to Duquesne University for philosophy. So that was a requirement of the program, was to get a bachelor's degree in philosophy, so 4-year degree. And I never thought that I would be going to college for a philosophy degree. That's not something that would be high on my list.
Yeah.
And that I'm sure if I told my parents, would be like, that's what I'm doing with my life, they'd be questioning, why are you getting that degree? So unless you're going to go on to law or something that would utilize it. But what was so great about it is it's really just teaching you how to think. It's teaching you how to wrestle with thoughts and ideas, to weigh them, to test them against other great thinkers and great thoughts throughout history. So it was actually a really great experience. And you did mention having to take Spanish. I had to take 2 years of Spanish at the collegiate level, and it was not great. You could probably talk with my Spanish teachers, and they would tell you poor little Eric was really suffering through those classes. But it's good. Put time into it and got it done. But near the end of my time there, they think about sending you off to what's called a school of theology, and that's really where you then begin to enter into the study of God and understanding who God is and how God interacts with us and speaks with us. And I'm speaking primarily from the Christian perspective here. So for our Christian listeners, I hope you maybe take a few thoughts away from this that are worthwhile for you, and for our non-Christian listeners. Hopefully it gives you a little insight into how Christians think.
Absolutely.
So I was at the end of my time there at Duquesne, and the bishop had decided to send me overseas to study in the Vatican at what's called the Pontifical North American College, which is a really interesting place. It's the largest group of permanent United States citizens outside of the United States that's a non-military campus. So it's a really large school on one of the hills overlooking the Vatican in the city of Rome. And I never would have expected, as this country boy from, Western Pennsylvania, that I'd be coming from here to there, what many consider to be really the heart of the church, to study the things that really matter to us. So it was a shock. It was a shock to be
Well, and I
sent there.
imagine it's probably not easy to get into that. What's the process of?
Sure.
You know, you had mentioned that the bishop, right, wanted you to go overseas and study there. Well,
Right.
you know, just like getting into Duquesne University, that's not an easy university to get into. I almost went to Duquesne. It was because of, you know, cost. I didn't end up going. I don't know if they still have the Tamburitzans there.
That's a good question. They did while I was there, so maybe.
I originally, and I'm just going to lay this out because this is where I'm at. I suffered in high school with my grades. After my dad passed away, I went through a period of not caring. And it wasn't until about my junior year that I realized, okay, I have to get this together because I want to go to college and I obviously need to bring my GPA up. I have to get good SAT scores. And I struggled. And I made it in just barely. I auditioned for the Tamburitzans. I was offered a full scholarship.
Wow.
I got into the university, but because my GPA had been low, I needed to take a summer program. And the Tamburitzans, the minute you graduate high school, you're there and you're training the entire summer. And they travel every weekend. So your grades have to be tip-top shape. And unfortunately, I couldn't do both. And so it was one of those things where I had to make a decision, right? And they said, if you come back next year, we will have a spot for you. Like, you were perfect. Just come back next year. Just do 1 year, you know, get your grades up. And then, and you know, it's interesting how things work out, right? Like you were just talking about this, how you had a high school guidance counselor telling you should get into journalism or you'd be great for that. And then here you are working for a media company. So,
right.
But everything always works out the way it's meant to. But I tend to do this sometimes on the podcast to just share a little bit about myself, because it's like, if I could go back, there's not much I would change. But if there was one thing, if I could go back, I would take school more seriously, because I got to a certain point where I was like, I actually love learning. It feels good when you're like putting your effort into something, especially when it's hard. Because I find like when we put so much effort into something that we really struggle at some point you have a breakthrough and you almost become really good at that. I've found that with certain things. Like the things I struggled the most with when I first was in fitness was putting my music together. And then that became the thing that I was the best at, was putting together these playlists. So just a little side note there that I wanted to share, because Duquesne's it's not easy to get into Duquesne University. So like, I'm also interested in how you got into this.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You're like, that's a great question.
How did I get into that? That's a great question in retrospect.
You obviously were proving yourself to be committed to your faith and committed to, you know, like you said, to serving people, to helping people. So they obviously saw that, but there has to be so much more to it than that, right?
Yeah, it is very much a weighing of not so much performance, but just seeing what is going to be the experience in theology that is going to make you the most rounded person for ministry, because there are a number of theology schools that you could be sent to, right? There's St. Vincent College, there's Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., so there are a number of different places that you could be sent to, and really it is the bishop and his advisory staff, the formation board, that looks and sees, you know, where are we going to send these guys? And I'm not going to lie. There's also a little petition that you do on yourself that says, this is where I would see myself as the most rounded. And I did say, I would really like to go overseas. That would be a great experience, not fully grasping what that would mean. In that I would be taking theology classes for 4 hours a day that were completely oral didactic classes in Italian, in spoken Italian.
Oh my goodness.
And I just sit there and there are no questions. You're not allowed to raise your hand. You just sit there and take notes. It was frustrating. It was hard, worthwhile because of really the world-class education that's provided over there. But you had to put in the effort to do it. And while I can't say that I completely merited that to be sent overseas, I was really glad to have the opportunity to do so. So having gone from philosophy to theology was really an important part in my life when I started to understand more, like who am I supposed to be, right? What am I supposed to be doing with my life?
That's so interesting. I didn't think that deeply when I was graduating high school or even in college.
Sure.
So it's almost like you really have stepped into your calling. It's a calling for you. It had to be. I mean, why else would you, you hear that saying that God doesn't give us anything that we can't handle.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes someone reminds you of that when you're going through something really difficult.
Right.
And I've struggled with that a little bit. That sometimes is hard for me because oftentimes you feel like if things are hard, we tend to sort of focus on, okay, this is really hard. And then something else, maybe it's not as dramatic or extreme, but then we're like, oh, well, now there's this, and now there's this, and now there's this. And our thoughts are very powerful. So it's like kind of getting out of those, thoughts. But I did not think that deeply. So I commend you for having just such a, it was just your calling. I really think that was something that was meant for you to step into. And it's interesting to me. I mean, you're still young. You have a young family. There's so much ahead of you. How do you feel about, there's a lot of people, and I'm one of these people who I haven't just been one thing in my life. Do you see yourself evolving as, how do you refer to yourself? Do you refer to yourself as a pastor,
Honestly, when I think of myself, I think of myself as a dad. I really think that the vocation that we refer to, as Christians refer to a calling as a vocation, that God calls us to do something, that God calls us to fulfillment in life. And he'll prepare you for it. He'll put you on a path towards it. There will be suffering along the way. That is a part of the Christian path, is that there's suffering along the way. But the more that we give of ourselves, the more we receive. And that's a little bit of sort of the Christian contradiction or paradox, is that God calls us to give ourselves away. And in giving ourselves away, we're not depleted, we're renewed, we're refreshed. We actually gain more the more that we give of ourselves. So in doing so, when I was younger and thought that, well, I'm going to give myself as to the church in service to parishioners and our flock and our people, that God was in sort of an underhanded way preparing me to give myself away to my wife and children. And I would say that having gone through seminary has made me a better man and a better father than I would have been before that experience. So I see myself primarily as a husband, as a dad, because that's the vocation God's called me to, is to raise my children and to prepare them to stand on their own 2 feet as sons and daughters of God out in the world. When I'm gone and they have to walk on their own, that's the calling, and that's the fulfillment that I wouldn't have seen in philosophy or theology that God was ultimately preparing me for. So that's I think the story writ large for me, is finally experiencing the fact that loving someone doesn't deplete or reduce your capacity to love; it increases it. So, and I learned that most through my children. Right, Elizabeth, my oldest, I couldn't have imagined when I first saw her that I would be able to love anything better or greater than this. And that I wouldn't be able to have the capacity to love a second and a third child. Oh my goodness. And you parents out there know this too, that when the second or the third comes along, you find there's more space than you thought possible. And that's really what I attribute to the Christian contradiction or paradox, that the more we empty ourselves, the more we're full. And we see that in Jesus, in his path, and dying on the cross, and the complete emptying of himself. And then our imitation of that in loving each other is that, well, yeah, we're actually filled by this. We're not reduced by it. It's not like your typical material things that when you spend money, it's gone. That's not such the case in the Christian life. And it's one of the beautiful, compelling things about it.
I had a guest on last fall that said that exact same thing. And she volunteers a lot. She's a nurse. It's actually my nephew's wife. They live in D.C., met at the Children's Hospital. He still works there as a pharmacist, but she's kind of worked in different facets of healthcare. And she started a few years ago. One of the doctors at the hospital was putting a group together to go to Haiti, actually. And they were putting these care packages together to take over there, but then to also train people that live there how to, provide medical care. It's something that they need in abundance.
Yeah.
So she's made multiple trips over there and talked about her experience doing that and just how fulfilling it is. And she said, I do it because it just felt good to be able to help other people. She said, but that's the thing. She's like, in order for us to receive anything in life, like love or whatever, she's like, we have to give it. We just have to continuously be giving to other people. And I'm one of those people, and I've started thinking about it recently, and I was like, I get involved in the arts and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I've always wanted children, but it just never worked out for me. So for me, it's like, well, how can I somehow be involved when it comes to the young people? Because they are the future, right?
Sure.
And I think for me being a young, as a young girl, I was a dancer and I did, scholarship pageants and different things like that. And I recently had to judge a scholarship pageant for young girls. And it was so hard.
Oh, I bet.
It was so hard because I thought they're all so good. They're so unique. And I just want to hug all of them afterwards and be like, you're amazing. Like, it doesn't matter if you don't win. Because I remember going back to when I did stuff and I didn't win, or I would place and I had trophies and different things, but I never won. Mm-hmm. Like Miss Butler County, I never won. I didn't. And you always think like, why wasn't I good enough? Why didn't I? And I feel like I'm definitely at a place now, especially having come from a dance background too, and a professional background of, teaching these girls how to, take how much like you love yourself and your family, right? And just like give that to the world, like as much as you can. And it makes me think about sitting down to family dinners every night. And we prayed and we sat down to dinners. Mm-hmm. And when we were younger, there weren't cell phones. I mean, did you have cell phones? And when did cell phones really start coming out?
No, I can remember when I got my first cell phone. I was such, I was a little stinker about it in my family because my older sisters got a cell phone first, and I was in 8th grade, and I complained so much to my parents, like, I need a cell phone. And to the point where it broke them, and they're like, "Fine, here it is. We were going to save it for your birthday, but we just want you to stop complaining." So
and asking.
I was like, "Oh, thank you, okay." And I got this little flip phone that you could play, what is it, Snake on?
Yes,
and I thought this was the greatest thing I ever got in my life. Mm-hmm. So yeah, quite a bit. But I did grow up in a time where there weren't cell phones.
Yeah.
So being sort of separated from a digital world prior to that, it's like the before and after for me, because now it's almost, you can't escape it. It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. And not being a parent, I don't feel like I have right to judgment. And also I know that, and I sometimes say this to people, there's only one person that can judge us. Mm-hmm. Truly, ultimately.
Right.
Do you think it's possible for us as, society, or I guess humans, if we just want to generalize it, to get to a place where we can stop judging people, and not just in general judgment, but like just so quick? I feel like there's a lot of like quick judgment.
Sure. What a tough question, right?
Sorry, I'm just
because it's so hard once, you're on Instagram and you're looking, and it's other people putting forth the best photos, the best pictures, the best things in their lives, and it can be quick. We can quickly jump to judgments on others one way or the other, better than or worse than it actually is. Just recognizing human dignity is something that is a challenge now with the advent of social media, of constantly being connected to the internet, where it's very quick for us to sort of jump into maybe arguments or judgments with other people that we've never met in our lives, and how useful that is. Certainly not useful for us, not for my heart, to be involved with that. The most important thing that I can do is engage with the people around me, right? Engage with the folks who are in my life, who God has put in my life. And that's my family, my extended family, and that's everybody here in Butler. That these are the people that are close to me in proximity, that God's called me to love and to recognize, and to put aside sort of the glasses of judgment and just look at them with love, with dignity.
Yeah. When I first started the podcast a year ago, the topic was addiction in Butler County, and I knew nothing. when I had moved away, and this was something I'd like to talk to you about too, because we did have this conversation about how moving away, right, living somewhere else entirely, and then coming back, it kind of changed our perspective in a lot of ways. Not just like how we felt about the world or about other people, but I think how I also approach other people, how I speak to other people, how I'm trying to be better at listening. I know that was something I always struggled with, and some things are learned behaviors. But do you, as I started saying it, I was like, my brain was going one way, and then I'm like, wait, where am I going now? Because I just totally lost my way.
Sure, yeah.
I'm like, wait, I lost my way. With the whole conversation of like social media and all of that, and having lived somewhere, have you ever had, I've had a lot of people say this to me where they always ask, like, why'd you move back? Why would you want to move back here? And most of the time it's a lot of friends of mine or people I know who've been here their entire lives, right? They've traveled and whatnot, but they've never moved away. They always wanted to. And I tend to tell people, like, well, what's holding you back? I mean, Butler's not going anywhere. You can always come back. Mm-hmm. You're never going to know unless you try it. And you could go for a year. It's going to, I'll be honest, it's going to be hard, right? There is a period of adjustment. I know everywhere I've lived, I had a period where I felt like I was being so tested and almost pushed to question, like, why am I here? Like, why am I really here? And it always just made me stronger, and it helped me find my people, because everywhere you go, you find your people. But do you find that, have people asked you that question a lot? Or are they interested in, obviously people know why you went. They know why you went overseas.
Sure,
so
yeah.
Maybe it's like a different experience for you than it is for me. And what do you say? I mean, I know why you moved back. I know why you're here. You already told me. I want you to tell the people that are listening.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good question, because when you have the opportunity to move around and be where you want, and maybe where you find places that are really great, why would you choose to come back to Butler? Mm-hmm. I love Butler. It's where my ancestors, when they got off the boat, they came this far and they stopped, right? John Campbell and Ann Christie came this far in the 1740s, and they died here and are buried, up near Shakora. Like, I can go visit their graves.
I'm so impressed that you know that, and I'm like, I need to figure that out for myself, but continue.
Yeah, it's worthwhile knowing, right, where we've come from, because we're injected into the stream of humanity at this point in our lives, and we didn't ask to be here. Here we are. So to know where we came from is an important part of knowing where we're going or where we ought to go next. So I know where my ancestors came and settled down, and there's a rich history here. It's beautiful. It speaks to sort of my Scottish heritage of,
me too.
rainy,
Scottish.
cloudy, let's go, more cloudy than Seattle. I love it. This is the place I want to be in my life. So why I came back here is because, this is where my family is. This is where we have always been. And I love this place, these people, these folks. It really is an extraordinary place to be. That's not to say that a lot of my view of the world had changed quite a bit, having gone and lived elsewhere. And that was certainly the case with having moved overseas to live in this massive city in Europe for 2 years. And it challenged me in ways I didn't expect. I expected to struggle with buses and public transportation and trains,
normal
the
things,
euro, like all of those things I expected to struggle with. But what was the most eye-opening for me was exposure to the poor in a way that I never quite experienced. Mm-hmm. I had done a lot of volunteer service work in my life, including 2 years chaplaincy at the Allegheny County Jail, visitation at Marion Manor, which is a nursing home for the elderly, working at the Red Door down in Pittsburgh, Jubilee Soup Kitchen, like all of these places where you can go and be exposed to those who are maybe in some way suffering or are in need. Overseas, you're exposed to it whether you like it or not. You're not going out and looking for it. If you walk to the grocery store, you're going to encounter several families who are homeless or who are begging for money or people who are sort of like the modern day leper, who we're afraid to touch, and we're just going to walk by and divert our eyes. We're faced with that in a way that I'm not faced with poverty in Butler. In some ways, we can insulate ourselves from suffering and from the challenges and difficulties because we have, you might have a single family home and a car that you can, retreat to and drive from place to place and not really have any experience with people who are less fortunate than us unless you go out and search for it. But overseas, you didn't have to search for it. It found you. And that was a challenge that I didn't expect going in, and really had to have others walk me through what that meant for me as a human person to encounter the poor and the least fortunate on a daily basis walking to school. We would walk from the hill on the Janiculum Hill down to the Gregorian University, which is where we did our formal studies in theology, by the Trevi Fountain. And awesome institution. I think something like 12 or 13 popes had graduated from the university. Something like 28 saints have gone there. It's just a really venerable institution, been around since the 1500s. But on your way there, you're facing difficulties and challenges that you wouldn't normally see in your everyday life here in Butler. And the assistance that I had in coming to grips with that were some of the people who were my mentors over there, that I would walk with a priest by the name of Father Joe Freedy. We would walk around sort of the ancient city down the cobblestone paths. And very early in my experience there, he took me on a walk and introduced me to his friends who were the poor. And he would walk, and the kids would run up to him. He'd toss them in the air. The moms and dads would come over. He'd give them hugs. They'd chit chat back and forth. Things that you wouldn't see tourists doing because they would just walk by or maybe drop a coin. But actually extending to them the acknowledgement of their human dignity is something that was really life-changing for me in understanding how we encounter people, just everybody. Because as a Christian, this is one of those interesting things about our lives. I mentioned before, we didn't choose to be here. God gave us existence. And coming from Christian perspective, God gave us existence. We didn't choose what family would be born to, what time, what place, what country. We're kind of just sitting on the side of the road, like blind Bartimaeus outside of Jericho, like clinking our can, waiting for somebody to drop a coin into. And God drops existence into our can, right? From the very beginning, in the core of who we are as people, we are all beggars. From the very beginning of our lives, we're beggars asking for existence. So what's different between me and the people that I had encountered on the street? Really nothing, because they and I were all beggars at the beginning. And it was in some way luck and providence that I ended up in one family and not another. So that was something that was profoundly impactful for me. And to have an encounter like that, to be reminded of the dignity of the other in such a powerful way, was something that you couldn't walk away from without having been changed. I can think of another experience. There was a deacon friend of mine. His name was Keith Romke. He's a priest now. I want to say he's in Rockford, but don't quote me on that. And it was Christmas Eve. We were in the refectory together having dinner. And he said, "Hey, Eric, we're going to go and have Christmas dinner with some friends of mine." And I said, "Okay." And mostly everybody else had left for Christmas. These guys would go and travel, cheap flights, cheap trains. They'd go around and see what Europe had to offer. I was not doing that. I don't know why I wasn't doing that, but I was there. And I don't know.
You're like, I just didn't.
Here I am. It's Christmas, and I'm on my own in a foreign country.
Yeah.
So Deacon Romke took me out out into the city, and we walked into this sort of tunnel between the Vatican and the Janiculum Hill. It was constructed for, I think it was for the Jubilee year in 2000, for more buses to be able to park. And there was a long walkway between here and there. And there were some, cutbacks and some dark corners. And we'd often find homeless people would stay in this tunnel, that they would sleep there. They'd bring all their belongings. They'd set up a tent for a little while. And it would be kind of a safe place for them. So, Deacon Keith has this tray of, I don't know, something like lasagna, and we're walking down through this tunnel, and we stop right next to these two folks, this couple, this man and woman, who are sort of sleeping there in their sleeping bags. And he sits down and he wakes them up. It's like, hey, how's it going, guys? And they just start chattering with him. It was so interesting to see that these folks and us, who were so different, they were Russian refugees, didn't speak any English, but could still have a conversation. And he said, hey, this is who we're going to have our Christmas Eve dinner with. And we just sat there and just
love that.
Had a meal together and tried to communicate using, pointing and, our hands and all of that. And I was like, this is the weirdest experience I've ever had, Deacon Keith. Honestly, I didn't know this was going to be happening tonight. And it wasn't until the end of the meal that the gentleman stood up, and Deacon Keith said, hey, can we pray together? He prayed. And then the other man then just extended his hands, put his hands on top of our heads, and just prayed in Russian, I assume. And it was this powerful cross-cultural moment for us. That was like, there is not a great difference between these folks and us. We could say that from the beginning, we're no different. And right now, it really is the fact that we're coming from different cultures and different places, but we are speaking the same language, so to speak, right?
Well, human connection, and he did something for those people that can never probably pay him back.
Yeah, absolutely.
And whenever you do something like that, I mean, imagine how they must have felt. Like they're sleeping in a tunnel in sleeping bags outside, essentially. Obviously they have cover, but never could they probably ever have prayed for that to happen or anything. I'm sure that there was a lot of prayers going on in their life for this has to get better, right? This is not, no one wants to live that way. It's interesting because, we talk about when I did start with addiction, changing the conversation behind that, like the stigma behind it. I've encountered a lot of people who at times don't want to help poor people or homeless people because they're like, well, they got themselves into that situation. And that is so close-minded to me, and it's so disheartening.
Sure.
Because it's comes right back to where it's judgmental. You're judging someone, you don't know their story, you have no idea how they ended up, but as human beings, I do feel that we are here to help people. A friend commented the other day, and I actually was thinking the same thing as I was driving home the day that it started snowing. We've had a couple snowstorms this year, right? And last year too, but, or I can't even remember now, honestly, if they were last year or they all have been this year, but I saw someone walking, on where 356 and 68 sort of merge up there. I was headed home, and there was just something inside of me. I was like, do I need to pull over and pick this person up and be like, where are you going?
Yeah.
Can I take you somewhere so you don't have to walk in the snow? And it was shortly after that, I remember looking, I kind of looked in my rearview mirror, and shortly after that, they literally walked over and were going into that plaza right there. So I was like, okay. And I'm sure there's a lot of people and family members of mine are like, oh, you should never pick up a stranger.
Sure.
Yeah, but I also feel like I think of myself in that situation. What if I was walking, and if it's the same person, there is a guy that rides a bike a lot, and he always has one of those sort of orange vests on. I see him riding a lot. And there's a guy who rides from, I don't know if he goes as far as from Zilly to Evans City. And I've seen him in this crazy weather. And there are just moments where I'm like, I need to lay my seat down, pop the back, be like, throw your bike in.
Yeah.
Where are you going?
Goodness.
I need to give you a ride. And it's, and I know it can be scary at times because you see bad things, but you also see good things.
Yeah.
And, that moment that you experienced, it's such a beautiful story because, he was teaching you without, sort of pushing that idea on you, right? He's like, I'm going to give you an experience. This is what we're going to do. And to sit down with two people and say, oh, we're going to have dinner with these folks who weren't even expecting that. That's just such a beautiful story. And I love hearing that because I know you started saying your passion, your purpose is being a dad. I feel like that's your calling, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these are all things that you're going to instill in your children. So that to me
Right.
is like, oh, this is great. You know, we
Right,
need
right.
more people that are open
Yes.
and that are willing to, extend their arms and even just like giving someone a hug, but treating them as humans. So sort of circling back around, I mean, your kids are young enough where they don't have cell phones yet.
Thank goodness. Yeah.
So, you and your wife don't even have to think about that yet.
Mm-hmm.
But you see a lot of kids, pretty young kids with phones. And most parents are like, well, it's for safety and so they can communicate. And we do live in a day and age where I think parents want to be able to have that. They want to be able to have that communication should they need to.
Right.
Which is sad that we even have to have this conversation. But, what do you plan on instilling in them when that time comes? And social media and how that all, I know some parents they don't want their kids on social media. And I'm like, as much as you're going to try to protect them, and we know from being kids and we know from being teenagers, I did things that I was told that I shouldn't do. And then I found out for myself or, got in trouble for.
Yeah.
And that is part of growing up and being a kid and learning. But what do you think when it comes to that in social media and navigating that and just with your experience and your background? And what would you say to other parents who are maybe struggling with that right now?
Yeah, goodness.
Sorry, that's a loaded one.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a worthwhile question because
I mean, take your time.
Gosh, if we're not
Remember,
as a culture struggling with this, then personally we are too.
Yeah.
And that starts with our own cultivation of virtue in our own lives, which is, am I using this thing, which is my phone, for a good purpose? Like, what's its purpose? Get down to the basics with it.
Yeah.
And that includes, am I loving the object in my hand more than I'm loving the people next to me? Am I using this object for good things and a good end? Is what I'm going to hope to instill in my children as they grow older. And just an acceptance of the virtues of prudence and temperance, of knowing when to use a tool for a certain thing. And having the wisdom to know when it's gone perhaps too far. And those are all things that start well before you get a device in your hand. Those are things that start as you're learning to play with Legos and as you're learning to share with your brother or sister or not share with them, which happens more often than not in my house.
I'm sure.
But yeah, the sort of growth in virtue needs to start at a young age, or it needs to start now. It's better to start now and be a few hours late than to never start at all. And that means, how am I using the device in my hand? Am I using it for a purpose, or am I just sort of burying myself in it? Because it's going to ultimately isolate me from others the more that I focus on social media and the phone and the stuff, the digital stuff, instead of the physical people around me. And I do really firmly believe that encountering those who are struggling earlier in your life will help you better empathize with folks later in your life. So being able to serve at a soup kitchen, and there are so many in Butler that you can volunteer at, or to pack lunches for folks who need them, to drive meals to people who aren't able to go out and get them themselves. The more that you expose your kids to that, the more that they'll accept that as a virtue that needs to be cultivated as they grow. At least that's my hope.
Absolutely.
And something that I feel like I can do more of now for my children, and I hope that they will find the same love for it that I did later in life, which is encountering and helping those who are most in need.
Yes.
So starting there breaks us out of this sort of, captivation with the digital and actually encountering the poor. And this is a deeply Christian principle, to the point where we can see in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 25, near the end of it, Jesus speaks very clearly on what needs to be done. He speaks very clearly in saying, what you have done for these, it's like you've done them for me. And what you haven't done for these, it's like you have not done them for me. And those are things like giving food to the hungry, drink to the thirsty, to welcome the stranger and the immigrant, to give clothes to the naked, to visit the sick and imprisoned. He's very clear about that.
Yes.
And that's something that should weigh deeply on my conscience if I'm not doing those things, if I fail to do them. And sure, there are some ways, and especially we in America, who are, compared with the rest of the world, globally wealthy, that our money can do that for us in ways that we might not be able to, right? Like I'm able to write a check to relief services who can go and help the sick and the imprisoned and the ill. But the more so better if I can do it with my own hands.
Yes.
If I can really get into it, and finding opportunities to do that, I think is critical, especially to answer the call, if we're Christian, to have you done this for me? Or have you not done this for me? And that's something that should be in one way inspiring us to action, and in another way haunting us, right?
Absolutely.
Like, what am I doing and what have I done? And let me tell you, arguing online is not going to be sufficient for instructing the ignorant. And we call these things are called corporal works of mercy, that they're important because they're bodily works that we do, not just thought experiments or things. They actually cause us to go out. And many of the miracles that Jesus had exhibited in the Gospels were physical encounters, right? That were touching, somebody grabbing his cloak, right? Him rubbing mud into a blind man's eyes, like to heal them. These are things that were physical encounters. And if we're going to emulate Christ in our life, then it's the physical encounter that we should search for, more so than just the digital.
You know, when you brought up Meals on Wheels, I know you were referring to Meals on
absolutely.
Wheels. There was a young girl who was in the pageant that I just was a judge for. And one of the things in her interview, one of the things she spoke to is how she got in the habit of writing letters for Meals on Wheels for the meals. Her grandmother used to do that and taught her to do that. And off the top of my head, I want to say she was 11 years old.
Wow.
And this is something that she does.
That's great.
And there was this part of me that I was like, I want to meet your whole family. I want to meet your siblings. I want to go and volunteer more, because you're watching, this is our future, right? The children are the future. And whenever I talk to I've had parents in here before talking about different subjects, hard subjects, and you know, it's always so interesting to me when I see kids who, you know, are so stuck on their devices. They need the device to be able to behave or to listen or be able to sit at a restaurant or even church. I remember as a kid going to church from a very, very young age. They didn't just put me in daycare. Like, I had to sit in church. I had to wear a dress. I had to sit there. My grandma would always bring Mentos. I remember that because she'd always have the Mento candy.
Wow. Fantastic.
She'd always bring the Mento candy. When I was really little, I was allowed to have a little, she'd bring a little pad and I'd have little crayons, and I was allowed to kind of, it's every once in a while I would sit and I'd have it on the pew. But then when we sang or whatever, I had to get up and I had to be a part of that and be involved, but I had to behave myself. And I remember the age where I went to, I never remember I went to Presbyterian church. So I don't remember if it wasn't like communion class, but it was learning about why we take communion. I was never allowed to take communion until I understood what it represented.
Sure.
And I'll never forget my brother one time giving me the evil eye when they were passing it around. I was in the back pew with my friends and I hadn't gone through yet. This was at the Mount Chestnut Church. The building's still there. It's that red brick building on the corner of Eagle Mill and, not on the Eagle Mill side, but it's on 422. The building's still there. It's like a chiropractic office now or something. But that was the original church that we went to. And I still remember the pew I was sitting in. I remember he was sitting up here, and I remember he looked over and looked back at me, and he was like, I'm not doing it. I'm not taking
amazing.
I'm not taking bread and, the wine. I was like, I wanted it so bad because I knew it was Welch's grape juice because I knew, do you know what I mean?
Sure,
I knew that they weren't serving wine, but whatever. And it just, I don't know. And it wasn't until I actually went through that class and I started to understand why it meant so much to learn about it. Mm-hmm. So it's also, with your children, I think now, and in the Catholic Church, it's different, right? I mean, they start a little bit younger sort of doing those types of things. So what's the what is it that they go through where the girls wear? Like they wear the white dress and.
Yeah, for First Holy Communion.
Yes. Okay.
They'll receive the Eucharist for the first time.
Okay.
And there's some some classes and training, just like you mentioned yourself. With your experience.
They give us a Bible.
There you go. You know it.
Yeah.
You know it. So I echoing your sentiments and how you grew up and sort of in the pew and all of that. We very much know that experience, having 3 kids going to church on Sunday.
Oh, I'm sure.
Your
son's a firecracker too.
Yeah, he is.
I still think of the birthday party whenever they had the
The piñata?
She had the mini piñata.
Oh my goodness.
I don't know if your wife showed you, but there was a boomerang that I did. And he was like whacking it. And then after he was like, he kind of like had this little like,
all right, violence done.
He's
we
like,
can move on.
I got it out. And I was like, same kid, same. I feel it. I feel it.
Yeah.
So sorry, continue.
So having about an hour where we have all 3 of them in a pew. And my wife insists we sit in the front pew. Well, she did when we first got married. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. And now we do it with all of our kids. We sit in the very, very front so our kids can see what's going on. And they're more likely to be engaged by it. So there's a part of that. But also, everyone can see us. And maybe some weeks we struggle more than others. But it does have a lot of training of giving a book, bringing snacks, being engaged with sort of physical material stuff in front of them instead of a screen. That we have had a little bit more training in just because of the nature of it, that how to keep our kids engaged with drawing and reading. And Ben, who wants to fold paper all the time in the front pew, and will take like all of the worship aids and just make little.
He needs a little origami book.
He does,
make
right?
Little like doves and things.
But it's funny we talk about this. He folds things together and calls them cell phones. So he'll fold this thing and be like, "Here's your phone. It's for you." It's like.
You're like, let's try something else.
Yeah, we're gonna have to teach you some other folds there, buddy. So
that's funny.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's good to hear that, because I think, and nothing against parents that if they need to put their kids in daycare because there's just not the right moment or whatever. But it is just something I remember. I remember that experience, and I do unfortunately remember when they built the new church. When they first built it, they hadn't put the carpet in yet. I'll never forget this. It was Christmas. I remember it was like the Sunday right after Christmas. And it might have been, I almost feel like it was that year. It happened to be Christmas Day, or it was like the day after was, like Christmas Day was a Saturday. So then we went to church on Sunday. All I remember is that what happened. I was mortified. My parents got me this doll, Pamela, and she talked. She had a button in the back, on her back, that you would, if you pressed it, it would turn on. And she would very loudly be like, "Hi, I'm Pamela. Want to be my friend?"
Oh, my goodness.
And I had her in church with me. And she was, she was fully dressed or whatever. And I don't know why. I was like, she was my baby. And I was like patting her on the back. And I hit the button.
Oh, no.
And in the middle of the church service, she starts like, and she had a jacket on because it was winter. So she was wearing a coat, and I hadn't taken her coat off yet, And so I couldn't I couldn't open the back of her like little dress because the coat was on, and they've got the arms and all the things, and I'm mortified. And literally everyone in my family is just like, and my father was a deacon, and I'm just like, and I just bolted up I just left. I left, and I'm like, I'm going to be in so much trouble. I'm going to be in so much trouble. I just like left to go out to the lobby, and I couldn't, and I turned it off. And then I like made my way back in, and I sat down, and my mother was like, "Give me the doll." And I was like, I just hated the doll.
Goodness.
It was so terrible, but that was my instinct, right?
Sure.
I had been taught to pay attention, to behave, to not be disruptive, and I know that definitely has carried throughout my life in a lot of situations where, even like in movies, I don't like to, it's not just about me. There's other people here.
Sure.
I don't want to be that person that is ruining someone else's experience. So then as you become an adult, you become a little bit more, you learn to, when is the right time to say something and not say something? Yes. And typically I would never to a stranger. And I had gone to, as an adult, this is like obviously many years later, I believe it was when I lived in Los Angeles. I've never shushed people in movies. I've never, and I'm with a friend, and these girls in front of us are kind of like chattering, and it was still it was like the last preview or whatever before the movie actually started. And she didn't even hesitate. she like leaned forward and she's like, excuse me, if you're going to talk the whole time, you're going to need to move because
Oh,
that's
man.
rude. And she just continued to, and I was like, this is so unnecessary.
My palms are sweaty just thinking about that
I know. I was
experience.
getting so anxious and I was like, why don't we just move?
Yeah.
You know, and also like the movie hasn't started yet. So it's really not even an
that's
issue.
so funny. Yeah.
Like my brain is thinking like, this is unnecessary. And so it is. You know, you had made a comment about social media. And it's true. And it's, you know, as we start to, you know, the climate right now with politics is just, it's a lot. It is a lot. And you know, your kids are obviously, they're at an age where you don't really need to have those conversations right now. But someday, how as a parent, let's say your kids were at an age, right, where this is coming up in school, kids have phones, they're seeing stuff on social media, and maybe have a lot of influence from their parents. And again, I always get nervous when I have these conversations with parents because I'm not a parent. So I'm never coming into these conversations with, well, this is right, this is wrong, because there's the gray. There's a gray area, and I don't think we're stepping enough into that. And maybe that's perhaps why I wrote down the assumptions and the predictions, you know?
Sure.
So I'm not trying to ask you to predict like how these conversations would go, but let's say Ben is 14 in this current climate. You know, what is the advice that you give as a parent with your own understanding of the world and what you've experienced up to this point and your beliefs and your feelings, but also allowing him to learn and grow and continue to be this person that you're cultivating him to be like, okay, you're ready.
Mm-hmm.
That's all for today's episode. Stay tuned for part 2 with Eric Campbell, where we continue our conversation. Thank you for tuning in to Alter Eagle. Join me every Monday for a new episode, and be sure to click subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Follow us on Instagram at Alter Eagle Podcast. Until next time, stay safe, stay hopeful, stay kind.